The ribs were still sizzling when Sheriff Alton drew a line in the dirt with his boot and said in his deep authoritative voice, "As of today, this man's brisket is outside your jurisdiction." Betty Ann Dobbins, HOA president of Willow Hollow Estates, clutched her pearls like they were wired to a defibrillator. She shrieked with a pitch that could shatter glass, "You can't just secede from the HOA." The sheriff tipped his hat, took a bite of burnt ends, and said with calm satisfaction, "Ma'am, he didn't secede. He never belonged to y'all in the first place." Everyone turned and stared at me, Rodney Fielding, standing behind my smoker, shirtless, sunburnt, and smiling like I'd just won the Revolutionary War with hickory smoke and dry rub. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. I'm a retired firefighter with one passion that keeps me going: meat. After 30 years of saving lives, I'd earned the right to spend my golden years perfecting my brisket technique on my 2.3 acres just outside Willow Hollow Estates. For the past 5 years, I'd been turning my backyard into what my friends called a slow-smoked paradise. I kept things simple. No social media posts about my cookouts. No open invitations to strangers. Just quiet weekend barbecues with close friends and the occasional wandering possum who'd learned to show up right when the ribs came off the grill. But the HOA had other ideas about my peaceful retirement. Enter Betty Ann Dobbins. 67 years old, 4-time HOA president, 2-time restraining order recipient, both garden-related incidents I later learned, and 1-time HOA conference keynote speaker for her infamous talk titled "Control is Love: Enforcing Standards Without Mercy." She considered my smoke signals a declaration of war against her perfectly manicured kingdom. The first confrontation came on a beautiful Saturday morning. I heard the whir of her golf cart before I saw her. Betty Ann rolled up to my property line, clipboard in hand, wearing a blazer in 90-degree heat like armor against fun. She announced with practiced authority, "Mr. Fielding, I'm here to inform you that unauthorized gatherings aren't permitted within our community standards." I was confused but polite. I walked over with a plate of pulled pork sandwiches I'd just finished for lunch and offered her one with a friendly smile. "Would you like to try some? Just came off the smoker." She recoiled like I'd offered her poison and hissed, "That's aggressive behavior, Mr. Fielding. I'm documenting this interaction." I shrugged and took a bite myself. Best batch I'd made all week. The letters started arriving the next Monday. The first one claimed, "Your smoker violates atmospheric consistency codes." I had to read that 3 times. Atmospheric consistency? I checked with my lawyer buddy Tom, who laughed so hard he nearly choked on his beer. The second letter stated, "Backyard flags exceed morale-neutral color limits." I had an American flag and a flag with a cartoon pig wearing sunglasses. Apparently, the pig was too cheerful. The third letter was my favorite. "Your lawn chairs are visible from a neighbor's upstairs powder room." Someone was looking into my yard from their bathroom and complaining about seeing chairs. The logic was impressive in its absurdity. I ignored every single letter because, and this is the important part, I didn't actually live in the HOA. My land bordered Willow Hollow Estates, sure, but it had never been annexed. I'd specifically bought this property because it wasn't part of their jurisdiction. Betty Ann didn't care about pesky things like property lines and legal boundaries. She added my address to the HOA registry herself, citing something she called visual proximity. According to her, if HOA members could see my property, it fell under their rules. Tom the lawyer laughed even harder at that one. Things escalated slowly over the next few months. Betty Ann would drive by in her golf cart at least twice a week, taking photos with her phone held high like she was documenting a crime scene. She recruited 2 other board members, Margaret and Diane, though they always looked uncomfortable when they accompanied her on these surveillance missions. I kept living my life, kept smoking my meats, kept ignoring the increasingly creative violations she invented. Then came Memorial Day weekend. I'd been planning my annual smoke-a-palooza for months. This wasn't just a barbecue. This was an event. My buddy Jake brought his guitar and amp for live music. I'd special ordered a whole bison shoulder from a ranch up north. My neighbor Maria made her famous cornbread that had caused 2 grandmothers to literally fistfight over the last square the previous year, though they hugged it out afterward over sweet tea. The party started at noon. By 2 o'clock, we had 40 people laughing, eating, and enjoying the perfect weather. Kids were playing cornhole. Adults were debating the merits of different wood chips for smoking. Jake was playing classic rock covers while his wife Sarah sang harmony. Betty Ann was watching from her sunroom with binoculars. At 3:30, she made her move. I didn't know it at the time, but she called 911 and reported, with a trembling voice full of false concern, that I was hosting an illegal smoke rave, violating HOA noise ordinances, and possibly barbecuing endangered livestock. She also mentioned potential drug use because, and I quote from the police report I later saw, "The smoke is too thick to just be from meat." Sheriff Alton arrived at 4:15 with 2 deputies. The music stopped. Everyone turned to look at the patrol cars pulling up my driveway. I walked over calmly, wiping barbecue sauce off my hands with a towel. "Afternoon, Sheriff. Something I can help you with?" Sheriff Alton was a big man, probably 6'4", with a kind of presence that commanded respect without trying. He looked around at my clearly family-friendly gathering and raised an eyebrow. He said in an official tone that was fighting back amusement, "Mr. Fielding, we received a complaint about an illegal smoke rave and possible endangered livestock consumption." Jake's 12-year-old daughter Emma piped up from the cornhole game, "What's a smoke rave?" That broke the tension. Several people chuckled. I stayed calm and professional. "Sheriff, you're welcome to inspect everything. That's bison shoulder on the main smoker, perfectly legal and sourced from Henderson Ranch. Got the receipt if you need it. The ribs are standard pork. The brisket is choice grade beef from Costco." Sheriff Alton walked over to the smokers, his deputies following. He lifted the lid on the brisket, and the aroma hit him like a beautiful punch to the senses. He asked quietly, "How long you been smoking this?" 14 hours, I replied with pride. 250 degrees, oak and hickory blend. He nodded appreciatively. "Mind if I try a sample?" "For evidence purposes, of course." "Of course," I grinned, cutting him a perfect slice with a crispy bark and a pink smoke ring. Sheriff Alton took a bite. His eyes closed. He chewed slowly, savoring every second. When he opened his eyes, he looked at me with newfound respect. "Mr. Fielding, I need to see your property documents." This confused me, but I complied. I went inside and grabbed the folder I kept with all my property information, including the original plat map and deed from when I bought the place. Sheriff Alton studied the documents carefully. Then he made a call on his radio. "Dispatch, get me County Clerk Harrison. Tell him it's urgent." While we waited, I served the deputies plates. They tried to maintain professional composure while destroying the best ribs they'd ever tasted. County Clerk Harrison arrived within 20 minutes, which was remarkable for a holiday weekend. Then the zoning commissioner showed up. Then 3 HOA board members who'd heard about the commotion. By sunset, half the neighborhood had gathered in my yard to witness something unprecedented. Sheriff Alton called Betty and over from where she'd been hovering at the property line, documenting everything with her phone. He announced in his official voice, loud enough for everyone to hear, after reviewing the legal documents and conferring with the county clerk and zoning commissioner, "It's been determined that Mr. Fielding's property has never been part of the Willow Hollow Estates HOA." Betty Ann's face went from red to purple. She sputtered, "That's impossible. I have his address in our registry." County Clerk Harrison, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up with bureaucratic precision. "Ma'am, you can't just add properties to an HOA registry. That requires legal annexation procedures, owner consent, and proper documentation filed with the county. What you've done is technically fraud." The crowd gasped. Someone actually said, "Oh snap," which I think was Jake's teenage son. Harrison continued, "Furthermore, I've reviewed your HOA's financial records, which are public. You've spent over $3,000 of HOA funds on legal letters, banner surveillance, and what's listed here as a smoke density detection drone for a property that was never under your jurisdiction." Margaret, one of the board members, stepped forward with barely contained anger. $3,000? Betty Ann, you told us the drone was for security." Sheriff Alton raised his hand for quiet. "There's more. Mr. Fielding, Have you ever given permission for drone surveillance of your property? Absolutely not, I said firmly. Then that's criminal trespass and violation of privacy laws. Ma'am, he turned to Betty Ann, you're looking at potential criminal charges. Betty Ann's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She stammered about community standards and property values, but no one was listening anymore. The HOA board huddled together for an impromptu meeting right there in my yard. 5 minutes later, Margaret announced with visible satisfaction, the board moves to suspend Betty Ann Dobbins from her position as HOA president, effective immediately, pending a full financial review and potential criminal investigation. The vote was unanimous, minus Betty Ann, who didn't get a vote in her own suspension. Sheriff Alton nodded with approval. Mr. Fielding, you're free to continue your gathering. In fact, he grabbed another piece of brisket, I might stay a while myself. Off duty, of course. Betty Ann stood frozen for a moment, her entire world crumbling. Then she exploded. She screamed with a voice that caused several dogs to start barking, "This is anarchy. You're creating unregulated meat zones. This is a violation of everything civilized society stands for." She pulled out a crumpled cease and desist order from her pocket, waving it frantically. I have legal documents. I have authority. County Clerk Harrison examined the paper and shook his head with professional disappointment. Ma'am, this is written on HOA letterhead for a property outside HOA jurisdiction, making it legally worthless and potentially another count of fraud. Sheriff Alton stepped forward with his official voice returning. Betty Ann Dobbins, you're being investigated for misappropriation of HOA funds, fraud, criminal trespass via drone surveillance, and harassment. I suggest you contact a lawyer. Betty Ann's legs wobbled. Diana, another board member, added with cold satisfaction, the financial review shows you also used HOA funds for your personal legal consultation about Mr. Fielding. That's embezzlement, Betty Ann. The crowd was dead silent now, watching the queen of the HOA fall from her throne. Sheriff Alton continued with the gravity of a judge passing sentence. The district attorney will review this case, but you're looking at potential felony charges for the embezzlement alone. That carries up to 5 years in prison and fines up to $25,000. Betty Ann's face went from purple to ghost white. She dropped her clipboard, her pearls, and her phone in rapid succession. Her voice came out as a whisper. 5 years. Plus the civil lawsuits Mr. Fielding could file for harassment and defamation. Tom, my lawyer friend, added helpfully from where he stood by the beer cooler. Betty Ann looked around at the faces of her neighbors, searching for support, for sympathy, for anything. She found only cold stares and satisfied smirks from people she'd tormented for years with petty violations. She tried one more time with a weak, trembling voice. But the property values. Margaret cut her off with sharp finality. The only thing dropping in value today is your reputation, Betty Ann. You're done. Betty Ann's mouth opened for another protest, but no sound came out. She turned and stumbled toward her golf cart, which had already been booted by Margaret with an HOA violation sticker for unauthorized use of communal property for personal vendettas. The last thing we heard was Betty Ann sob as she realized she'd have to walk home in her blazer and heels, past all the neighbors she'd terrorized, while the smell of my perfectly legal, gloriously smoky barbecue followed her every step of her half-mile journey of shame.